Ta-da.
There we go.
There it is. Glorious. Okay. All right. So thank you to everybody for joining today's episode of the Uplink. We are talking with Austin Senseman, who is the co-founder and CEO of a fantastic company called Conserv. I'll let Austin introduce himself in a moment. Rough agenda for today is a quick overview on the Helium Network. So although we've been doing a fair amount of webinars and there's a ton of information out there on Helium, we do always like to start with an overview about Helium and sort of what it's all about for people who are not generally in tune on the basics. And then we'll talk more and focus more on Conserv's use case, both the Helium specifics and then generally how it sort of works in the market and why people are finding this valuable. And then at the end, we'll save probably 15 minutes for questions and answers. And as I mentioned before, use the Zoom chat liberally. Laura will sit there and sort of collect questions and we can field them at the end. And then if for whatever reason there's not a question you want to put in public, feel free to send it to Laura privately and we'll make sure that it gets answered. So with that said, I am Mark Phillips. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Helium. I have the pleasure of working with all new and existing companies on the Helium platform like Conserv. I also spend a fair amount of time in our community doing just about everything. You may have seen me we're actually on Discord now. We just moved over from Slack. I'm in there as Phillips. I'm based out of Boston. I've been with Helium for upwards of 7 years now, so pretty much since the beginning, and it's been one hell of a ride. Austin, you want to give a quick background on yourself?
Yep, sure. Hey, I'm Austin Senseman. I am the co-founder and CEO at Conserv. My background, I came out of college with a sociology degree, just sort of interested in interesting problems, and started working in the finance and analytics field and did that for a long time and started this company early 2019 here in Birmingham, Alabama, really focused on, trying to figure out how to sort of ride the wave of IoT. And we settled into a space which we think is really very interesting. And so thrilled to share a little bit more about the business and how I work with Helium later, but that's the very short version.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to get into this later, but what's the startup scene like in Birmingham? Is it up and coming? Are you guys the whole game down there? What's the status?
We're absolutely not the whole game. So the big thing that happened here, this is not the Bay Area. This is a sort of middle market southeastern city. We did have a company Shipped, which you can think of like it's an Instacart sort of rival. They were bought by Target for about $600 million.
Oh, not bad.
4 years ago. So that was the first real exit of that size for us in a while. And so there's a lot coming on the coattails of that, but there's definitely an emerging scene here. It's a lot better than it was 10 years ago. There's capital, there's seasoned entrepreneurs with advice. There's things happening here. The message for people living outside of the region is if you're an investor, your valuation multiples are a lot better if you come down here and invest. You're not fighting over deals the same way. So, just a word of advice, like those markets in between the right and left coast are worth looking at if you want to get out of the box a little bit.
All right, so heads up to anybody on the call thinking about finding a company, consider Birmingham. Austin, we'll bring you in. Okay, all right, so a bit about Helium. Background, all right, advanced too much on the slides already, succeeding. So we were founded in 2013 with a mission that looks very much like what it is now, basically to build decentralized wireless networks for device and sensor data. The technology obviously looks a little bit different, but the core ethos, the things on which we were founded and our reason for being very much is the same. And so we've raised, I think, about 54.5 million US from a whole host of fantastic investors who have backed us for this mission in a huge way. Conserv Ventures, First Mark Capital, and Google Ventures, Mark Benioff, Munich Re, and then most recently Multicoin Capital and Union Square Ventures for the round in May of last year. So, the thing we've been pushing for all these years, and we think we finally landed on the right model, really gets at the core of what we think is the big issue here, which is today's connectivity networks are wholly inadequate for the next generation of IoT devices. And again, most people on this call are probably educated on what IoT devices are and the sort of requirements that they have. But when we went back to the drawing board about 2 years ago to sort of revisit what it was that we didn't think we were doing as well as we could for companies like Conserv, we landed back on this sort of core set of requirements that we wanted to bring to the market. And we're gonna hit on a lot of these today in this conversation with Austin. But in our mind, the network that needs to exist for these sensors, these new IoT applications, has to enable things like years of battery life from a sensor, has to enable things like tiny form factor. So, the companies that we're talking to more and more are looking to basically make the sensor the least sort of relevant thing in the entire application. It's all about the data. And so the sensor can be as tiny and as small and as minimal as possible. Asset tracking without cellular, and basically the whole idea that you can get data from a moving object without having to use a cellular network. We wanted the network to enable this. That won't come into play a ton with this use case, but it's still super relevant for a lot of the big use cases for Helium. Miles of range. So in the right situations, you want to be able to deploy network coverage and put a sensor somewhere where it can get access to a network from miles away. And so using LoRaWAN and Helium sort of a network coverage implementation, we are able to offer that in a lot of situations. And then the last two, we want things to be open source. We want security to sort of be present at every layer of the stack. So most of the technology, I'm not going to speak for Austin, but most of the technology on the Helium side that we'll talk about today is entirely open source under friendly licensing. And we will only get more open source and more decentralized about things. And then the security component has to come into play for people to work and feel comfortable on top of the network. So with that, we about 18 months ago steered our infrastructure to start rolling out what is the world's first peer-to-peer wireless network. And when we say peer-to-peer, we don't necessarily mean device to device, because Conserv, for example, doesn't have sensors talking to each other directly. But what we mean by peer-to-peer is actually the way that this network is built out. So we designed an incentive-built network, right? So this will come into play a lot in this discussion today. Austin and I will talk about how Conserv actually builds out their infrastructure on top of Helium, and we have essentially directly married the people and companies building out the infrastructure with companies like Austin, who are in need of building out infrastructure and just want to see their application succeed. And so, today there's upwards of 4,500 hotspots on the network in the United States, with a few that are popping up in Europe. That number is going to more than double in the next, call it 5 to 12 weeks. And so, the network model has succeeded beyond our sort of highest expectations, which has been fantastic. And it's all mainly due to the use of the Helium hotspot and the Helium blockchain that rides on the hotspot, and the usefulness of the wireless network. And so today, as we'll talk about, Conserv goes into buildings and deploys network coverage on the Helium network that provides backhaul for their set of sensors that delivers data and insight into their clients. And it's all built on an extension of the Helium network, which is, could be in a hotspot that already exists, but in a lot of cases for Conserv, it's a new hotspot that goes in to sort of expand coverage as needed. And that's really part of the magic of the model, that we can sort of build coverage in an ad hoc way by bringing together the supply side, which is the coverage, and the demand side, which is companies like Conserv. So that's a little bit of background on Helium. If people have more questions on that, drop them in chat so Laura can sort of prep us. But I don't want to spend too much time talking about this. I want to kick over to Austin and Conserv. So with that, Austin, I'll kind of let you drive here, and I will advance through slides as you need me to, but why don't you give us an overview of what Conserv is all about?
Absolutely. So Mark, we talked about this. I'm definitely a bit of a slide minimalist, so I hope this is more of a conversation. Lots of interesting things for us to talk about. I'll just say a little bit about the company, like why we exist, who we serve, and we can start to weave this together into the Helium story. So in any community you live in, you have culturally significant things around you. They may be in your home, they may be in museums, they may be in parks. These are objects that help us tell the story about our families, our communities, our countries, right, humanity. And we broadly think about these as collections. Collection is something that's worth taking care of for future generations. And the reality of collection objects is they fall apart over time, right? Time sort of, wears things out. And for people that are tasked with taking care of collections, their job is to slow down or arrest the deterioration of things. And the main way people do this is by creating good environments. So temperature, humidity, light, vibration, things that cause damaged objects, people try to measure and manage. And so we partner with collections to help them measure and manage those things. This is the device we make. We don't think of ourselves primarily as a sensor company. We like to think of ourselves as a solution company, but because we're sort of in this new LoRaWAN space, which we'll talk about, we did end up building our own product. I'm the CEO of the company. Nathan McMinn's my co-founder. He's the CTO. And we can tell a little bit more about the origin story in a minute, but that's the basic gist of why we're here. Let's look at the next slide.
So before we jump into this, so give me the flip. I think you're about to, but what is the genesis, right? Why two smart guys come together and start saying, the state of the art. Sorry, I had to make that pun. The state of the art for monitoring in collections is not ideal. I mean, what's the kernel of beginning there?
Right. So our initial thesis in this market was we thought IoT was macro a good place to be. Sort of, we're still early, we think, and so we thought data itself is kind of a commodity. It's clearly critical to these, but the valuable part for the business we wanted to build is in the interpretation, analysis, decision making that goes on top of the data. So Nathan and I went out in search of an interesting problem, really. Right, we can use sensor data to solve X fill in the blank problem. We just went looking for what's a good problem. We talked to lots of different people. There's a huge diversity of application providers here that you run into. They're solving different problems. So we talked to people who breed mice, take care of storage, people who run science labs, who run grocery stores, pool maintenance, et cetera, and we ended up in a museum. Nathan's parents come from a background of museum conservation, so. We ended up in a museum, the Birmingham Museum of Art here with Nathan's mother, and she's showing us the sensors they use to keep track of the environment in the museum. And without showing you one of these, if I just said the words 1995, I think you have a good sense of what I might be talking about. Right?
I can guess, sure.
Someone had to walk around with a USB stick and plug it into these things to get the data out of it. Just walking around, a lot of the batteries are dead because they're not wireless is an important thing. So after talking to all these different people in lots of different areas and having a sense of what the problems were out there, like when we saw this, it was like, oh, okay, we need to go validate this market and figure out if there's a real opportunity here. But this is clearly like a great place to start. And that was February 2019, so not that long ago.
Wow. So, okay. So you guys have only been at this for a year and a half. Interesting. So this is, I'm going to put up the sort of architecture that you have, and it seems like we're cutting off the end of the word sensors and networks on the right there. So your architecture is fairly straightforward in that you have some set of sensors talking to the Helium Network, in this case represented by that hotspot on the graphic, and then you've got your software. And as you mentioned, the software and the sort of value around the data is where you guys really differentiate. Can you talk a bit about the set of sensors that you're using? I know that you've got a combination of sort of homegrown stuff that's very specific, and then in the past you've used things from LoRaWAN ecosystem companies like Radio Bridge and Tectelic. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So even before we found the use case, we were very interested in LoRaWAN, and so one of the first things we did actually was build a little homegrown LoRaWAN network here in Birmingham. This was before Helium hotspots were on our minds. So we bought some other stuff and said, just to see would it work. Like people say the range is 5 miles. Is the range really 5 miles? Like we needed to know. And so we did a bunch of that stuff, kind of smart cities type stuff. And there were some vendors that were really helpful there initially. So on the sensor side, Radio Bridge, Tectelic, Layered. They also make gateway products that we used. And so we just set some of that stuff up, like, does it work? And we still use some of those products in our deployments. The primary sensor we deploy is ours. We were trying to make sure everything a collection cared about, they could get in one device. Because what was going on, we saw was, if they had to do temperature and relative humidity and light and vibration, they were having 4 or 5 things, and it became a hassle for people. So we primarily deploy our own, but for things like water leaks and outdoor monitoring and a couple other things, we still buy from Radio Bridge and Tectelic. So
interesting.
I mean, we're a bit of an integrator, right? I mean, we do have our own device, but I don't really think of us as a sensor company. We need sensors to do the work we do, but we're really trying to just solve this problem people have.
Yeah, and nor should you, sort of peg yourself as a sensor company. I think the ultimate is creating value from integrating some number of sources here, and it seems like you guys have done that quite well. So on your core sensor, what do you have on there for sensing elements? What are the 3 or 4 things you're always sort of pulling?
Right. If you think of it as like a pyramid of, the foundational things are temperature and relative humidity.
Mm-hmm.
Most collection environment decisions are made around that. That's sort of the basics, doing the basics well.
Mm-hmm.
Right above that is light, so UV, infrared, and visible. Collections that are a little further along are doing that. And then we do
Mm-hmm.
some basic vibration monitoring using the accelerometer on the device to do event-based stuff. Did someone bump into something
Sure.
or something like that?
Right, interesting. So can you give us a few examples of what sort of decisions end up getting made after Conserv has been in there and sort of has started analyzing data? I mean, is there like an aha moment that most of these curators have, or is it just sort of you're looking at things over time and saying, oh, I need to reposition this? I'm talking, of course, as an entirely uneducated person in this space.
Yeah.
Like, what decisions are people making?
Yeah, it really depends a lot on their maturity level coming into this. So it ranges from things that seem mundane to things that are really critical. So, I on sort of the things we didn't think about side, in one collection that we serve, they have a policy where a security person, as they are in the galleries in the evenings, need to go into some of these storage spaces and just visually inspect that everything's okay in there. And when they do that, they go and they have to turn the lights on and look around and turn them off. Well, when they started getting this data, they saw that like the lights were never coming on. And so they found out that the security team wasn't doing the inspections they were supposed to do. And it felt a little Big Brother, but that visual inspection was an important part of keeping the environment. So, unexpected things there.
Sure.
The more common thing we see is, if you are using a non-wireless sensor device, you're going and you're collecting your data sometimes every week, mostly every month.
Right.
So, end of the month, you get the data. Wow, 3 weeks ago, there was this crazy problem.
Oh, man.
A little late to do something about that. And so, the primary thing, I think, in our value prop right now is find small problems before they're big problems. You can get real-time data. You get an alert when something's going on. You can call your facilities people. Things get fixed pretty quickly. That is the most powerful sort of aha moment we're giving people right now.
It's sort of crazy. So we see that theme a lot across a lot of our customers, and it's crazy how most of these industries are going from being okay with only getting data like once a month to not being able to live with it, every day, or hourly. But somehow they made it work. We have a customer that does food sensing inside of large facilities for things like bananas and apple storage, and they sense ethylene, which is an indicator of sort of the ripeness of fruit. And again, it's a similar situation where they have like a person with a clipboard that goes in and takes 5 samples every 30 days and is then accountable for the state of something ridiculous like 5 million apples, right? And now they're putting in sensors that give them sort of real-time insight into the ripeness of this entire massive storage facility. So very, very cool thing to see. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Helium specific stuff, because I am somewhat selfish and a fan of what we do here.
Absolutely.
So you guys were built not initially on Helium's version of LoRaWAN, the sort of the Helium network server infrastructure. And just for some high-level information for everyone here, so the way that the Helium network operates is somewhat similar to a company like Things Network or Senate or Actility, in that there's a network server that operates and routes data back from some set of gateways. With Helium, we do things slightly different in that we've built a decentralized network of these hotspots, and quite soon, any LoRaWAN gateway, we're actually doing a lot of that work right now, to basically enable not just Helium hotspots that create coverage, but something from a Tectelic or a Layered or a Microtech. And so due to the decentralized nature of the network that we've built and the fact that we have this sort of global routing infrastructure that rides across all of these hotspots, we can enable data from any sensor that Conserv deploys, talking to any hotspot, to end up back at their, I think you guys use AWS, right, for your infrastructure? So that's where it ends up. So let's talk a little bit about why Helium became more of an attractive network option for you guys versus your initial deployment, which I think was on TTN or maybe TTI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So every time we implement a solution for a customer right now, we have to provide a way to collect data with a sensor, and we have to provide decision-making analytics software experience. And in the middle, we have to provide a network, right? If I have a LoRaWAN device, I can't just go turn it on and expect there to be coverage. So for us, it's, this is a more complicated business model. Like, we made a LoRaWAN decision pretty early, right? Like, you go into a museum, like, why do people not have wireless stuff in museums? It's because these are big buildings, they're difficult, lots of concrete and steel. It's really difficult to get Wi-Fi working everywhere. And then you have like storage spaces, like why would you even put Wi-Fi in the storage space, these kinds of things. So we were really committed to LoRaWAN. And, when Helium made the switch to LoRaWAN, that was a big aha moment for us. It was like, okay, great, right? Because we were gonna have to go in and sort of rework the firmware on our sensor devices. And we were working on this, right? We're gonna do it, right? But when we switched to LoRaWAN, it really just made it a lot easier for us to say yes. So that was the first big thing.
I think, by the way, I remember that first conversation that we had. And I want to say it was November of last year.
Right.
And it was you and Nathan and myself and maybe our COO, Frank, and we were talking to you guys about your use case. And we were talking about the coverage that we were starting to roll out and sort of the footprint that we were starting to put together. And then you said, well, great, we're using LoRaWAN, obviously. And we said, well, we're going to need you to switch to this thing called LongFi,
right.
Which in our mind is a better version of LoRaWAN on top of the LoRa silicon, the LoRa physical layer. And your reaction was not, you guys were not ecstatic at the idea that you'd have to be switching your.
Well, as a startup, you can imagine the amount of time we had spent, sweat, pain, like building V1 of our sensor, right? It's like, if you guys just want to redo that, that'd be great. So, yeah.
I mean, the reason that we did that, as you and I were discussing yesterday, is because there are scores of companies like Conserv that have built, V1 or V2 of a product that is committed to LoRaWAN, and that find the idea of sort of Helium's coverage footprint and ability to roll out coverage very attractive, but have no desire, to rebuild the wireless link. Once, as you know better than most people, once you get something that works, you don't want to mess it, especially on the hardware and wireless side. So switching to LoRaWAN definitely helped you. Talk a bit about what the Helium console does in terms of, the sort of tagging and labels and device provisioning.
Yeah, right. So the context there, I started talking in November. We're in Birmingham, Alabama. I think January, February, you guys send a product manager to Birmingham to talk to us. And we're like, wow, this is great, right? Right. And so, we get some pizza, right? We sit in a room and we are heard. I mean, there's no other way to say it, right? And like, I manage our product as well. So I really understand the power of sitting down with the people you want to serve and really listening to them. And then, even better, you guys really heard us and responded to a lot of things that I'm sure you didn't just hear from us, right? But we're sort of common to this ecosystem. And, the LoRaWAN decision had been made. What else did we really need to provide a more frictionless experience for this to be easy for us to say yes to? And so right now, like deploying devices on the Things network, for example, is a very sort of a rigid process. It's like putting a sensor, assigning it to an application. It works, right? It works really well, but it's a lot more work than maybe it should be. So creating in the console a way to tag sensors in a way that allowed you to easily move them between different applications. It allows us to take stuff, set it up, test it, move it when it gets deployed to a customer. It just makes the whole process of setting this stuff up a lot simpler. And you guys did the same thing really with AWS integration. So, on other setups, there is an AWS integration, but it's not complete. You have to go in AWS and set up a lot of stuff for it to really work. Again, it works great, but it's a little bit more work. You guys really spent a lot of time and detail getting the AWS integration just working, right? You just log in and it works. And so there are a couple of things there that aren't major frictions, right? But are incredibly user-friendly now when it comes to taking a device, getting the data, flowing in the right way to the right place in the right format, so that then you can really focus on the things that your customers care about.
Yeah, the integration for AWS and goes also for the coming ones for Google Cloud IoT and Azure IoT. Those are a pain for us to build because we do take the time and care to sort of integrate with their, I think AWS uses X509 certs per device. And so, that's built into the integration on the console side, which is, as you've just mentioned, a sort of huge advantage when trying to build something quickly. Okay, cool. So we have been building a lot of migration tooling for coming over from networks like TTN. What's the status of that for you guys? Are you using the command line interface? Have you started using the new web UI that we have inside of console?
So I think Dahl sat down with Nathan on Friday to look at the new user interface for the first time. So it's worth saying at this point that we have, a significant install base on Tectelic gateways, I think of those as hotspots, right? And that's running through the things industries right now. We sort of got to a point where we needed to, for context, folks, things industries like the paid version of sort of the managed services version of things network. So, some of that will stay there, some of it will move over, right? But now we just have a lot of flexibility in how we want to deploy it. Again, this is just, being able to switch to Helium when we need to go that route it just became a lot easier for us. So right now that's still going on the command line, but we look forward to those tools, evolving.
Yeah, I think we well, I know that my team just documented the web-based migration stuff, and it's actually remarkably slick. You can just basically get an ID from the TTN console, put it into the Helium console, and things will just happen in the background. And you can also replicate all of your application IDs over as labels, which is remarkably slick.
Nathan said it was click this button and it works.
That's what they go for.
That's what you want to hear.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, the thing is, you've chosen LoRaWAN, right? And LoRaWAN is based on a specification, and we all do our best to sort of mind the spec, although there are some sort of deviations. And so we're not innovating on LoRaWAN, the wireless protocol, right? The LoRaWAN sensor on top of TTN is going to work the same as it is on top of the Helium network. But it's those tools, those sort of ease of use things, like the migration tools and like the AWS integrations, where we're really trying to set ourselves apart. Plus, sending Dal down to Birmingham to have pizza, of course, is a big differentiator. Okay, so last piece here before I want to jump into some Q&A, because I think we're running at about 20 plus minutes and I want to leave some time, is something that is entirely unique to Helium is this idea that we are deploying this infrastructure as an incentive-based network, right? We have, we've built the largest public low power wide area network in the United States in just 10 months by basically giving people a reason, right? And if you go to the Helium Discord server, there's thousands of people in there talking every day about building the network, giving these people a reason to come and be part of this network. And so one of the big components of our deployment is a group of people called patrons, right? And so these are people who are very active and deploying typically 15 or more hotspots. There's a program that we have that caters to people that are doing large deployments. And something that we found, and something that came together nicely with Conserv, is that we're putting together enterprises and startups like Conserv with patrons, these individuals, and in some cases companies that are founded just to build the network out, so that we can essentially bundle coverage with your sort of application. So can you talk a bit about how that works for you guys and sort of advantage that gives you?
Yeah, this really came together well. I feel like we were sort of, something was watching over us, like guiding this down this road. So Derek Walczek is an investor of ours. He's here in Birmingham, and through Multicoin Capital is also an investor in Helium. And he had joined the patron program, which for him means he wanted to bring Helium hotspots to Birmingham to help build the network out here. And I mean, there's a reason why there's not huge widespread low power wide area network coverage in the US is just the incentives haven't been correct. And, that's being solved now with Helium. And so we work with Derek, and there's also another guy, Jeff Gale here in Birmingham, who we're working with as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're patrons, they have hotspots, and they sort of run into the problem of what's the best way to deploy these. And one thing we can show up with is, hey, we have a customer, usually in a very interesting place, like in an interesting geography, and we know data is going to be transmitted through that hotspot. Like, would you like to place a hotspot here that supports, the use case that we're installing? And it's just a win-win. They get to take a hotspot and put it in an interesting place with an interesting story. We don't have to go out and buy a networking solution to install, right? The patron helps us with that. They earn the tokens off that experience. And it's just really, it really works well. And so we'll talk about this a little more in the Q&A, but we are very open to working with patrons, anywhere and everywhere who are looking for ways to get their hotspots out in the market. Like, for example, we don't have a hotspot in MoMA yet, but MoMA New York, they're a customer of ours. Like, that'd be an interesting place for a hotspot. Would you like to tell people your hotspot's there? It's just a cool addition to a story that's already pretty good. So that's been our involvement with the patron program so far. I saw some people have some questions like, how do I get involved? That's not an Austin question. That'd be a good Mark question.
Yeah, this part of the network fascinates me endlessly, and seeing patrons sort of get put together with companies that have use cases was not a thing that we ever even conceived of happening. Right? We said, oh, we'll have individuals sort of build this peer-to-peer network, and it'll grow, and it will fill in coverage as needed, and then use cases will sort of arise. But it's the biggest problem that we face, which is of course the biggest problem with any sort of large-scale network build-out, whether it's Uber with physical taxis or Helium with wireless networks, is that you have to have the infrastructure before people can find it valuable. But this is really the sort of perfect marriage of supply and demand, right? So we are building up that supply as quickly as we can, and it's actually, like I said, quite impressive. It's the biggest network in the US, and it's growing, and it will double in size in the next 6 weeks. But when we get to take a patron and put them together with someone like Conserv, it's just like more magic than one could have imagined when we designed the model. Okay, cool. Yeah, and so if people are, I think there's a few patrons on this call, and if people are sort of aspiring patrons, I am the person to talk to sort of about those things. I'm mark@helium.com, and you can sort of get in touch, and who knows, maybe you can end up helping man, I'll give you a hotspot for MoMA in New York if you guys want it. I'll happily do that. All right, so let's see here. So walk me through what the deployment process looks like for a customer. So you sign someone like a MoMA. They need, how do you figure out how many sensors they need? What are you shipping them? Who's doing the deployment? How does that actually work? I'll go back to this slide with it.
Yeah, that's a good question. So our commitment to the market is that it's a no hassle setup. In fact, the words we use that get people's attention are no IT department required, right? Yeah. So people like that. People like to hear that, and so we try to be faithful to that. So the idea is, we talk about your collection. People, of course, have this question, this many square feet, how many sensors do I need? And, when you think about a room full of art on the walls, the room environment isn't homogeneous. So we tend to over deploy, and then we allow people to walk it back. So like, let's put 5 sensors in a room and just see, where I'll use the word hotspots here because that actually is right in a different meaning of the word. Like where the hotspots, right. Where are the hotspots in the room, right? Or is the room homogeneous? Maybe we can get away with 1 sensor. So we actually allow people some room to explore that on their own before committing to a certain sensor count. But then the idea is, we want you to be able to plug in your gateway, plug in your hotspot, spend a little bit of time getting it set up, less than 5 minutes. And then you pull the batteries out on your sensors and you put them on the wall, and that's it, you're done. And because LoRaWAN has such great range, it's not infinite, but, in really big, complicated buildings, we've had incredible success. You just pull the battery tab out in the sensor and put it up on the wall, and that's generally it. You open up the app on your computer or your phone, and the data's there. And it's a really magical experience for people who think that having wireless stuff in their collection is too complicated for them, right? It just tends to work, and that's a feeling we love to share with people.
Yeah, fascinating. And then who are the primary stakeholders at a facility or an institution that's deploying your stuff?
It's all over the place, right? So, we tend to sell into customers that have someone on staff, whether in a part-time or full-time capacity, who's dedicated to doing environmental monitoring work. That's like part of their job, right? The tools we've created, if you give them to someone like that, they're really able to succeed in doing that job well. The counterpoint there is we don't do as much work right now with a private collector who may not have that kind of expertise on staff, right? So I can give you the tools, but if you don't show up with the knowledge about how or why to do environmental monitoring, it's less valuable to you.
Right.
That's going to change over time, right? You can imagine a world where, because this stuff is all in the cloud, we send the stuff to a collector, they put it on the wall, that data starts to surface to the cloud. A consultant, 500 miles away can log on and look at it together with them, and provide. So there's a fractional conservator model that will be baked into that eventually to support any kind of collection. But the main stakeholder at a collection has a lot of different titles, but it's someone who's interested in collections care. That's the word.
Okay. Collections care.
Right. And often oftentimes that person is sort of like an accidental conservator, is what we call them.
Right.
I'm saying? It's like, I'm the director at the museum, but this is a 3-person staff, so I'm also the conservator.
Yeah, it's that saying, don't get too good at something you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So, are there, and this is just a question about, from me, I'm very curious now. Are there, so in a big institution like MoMA, for example, they have all sorts of probably, contractors that service things. Are there HVAC technician sort of companies that specifically service this vertical, like companies that claim or do good work in sort of maintaining spaces for art versus, people living in them?
Yeah, so at the HVAC level, no, not really.
Okay.
So you certainly have consultants, and facilities people at museums, at a place like MoMA, like the facilities people there have a deep understanding, right, of building management systems for museums. Where you see a little differentiation in the market is architects who build,
right,
who spec out museums, like they're people who understand the way you put an HVAC system together for a collection. This is very different, than what you would do in your office building. But those folks are just critical to the success here. So, we talk about stakeholders generally. It's the person who's in charge of doing the monitoring. You get a piece of data that just simply opens a loop for them to get the facilities people working on resolving the problem. And so the platform is meant to open those loops and then help people close them.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So I'm going to reconfigure my screen to sort of do some Q&A. But while I'm setting that up, do you have any questions for me? Anything I can answer for you?
Yeah, I know the answer to this because I've sort of experienced personally, but I'd love to hear it. I'm sure people on the call would like to hear it. But what is really the compelling offer that you make to solution providers like us? When you show up and talk to folks like Conserv, right, and you say you should reach out to Helium as a partner for your IoT solution, like what's the story?
Yeah, so it kind of goes 2 different ways. So in the case of someone like Conserv that is sort of already sold on the idea of LoRaWAN, arguably our job is much easier because you're sort of already bought into the idea that there's this wireless network that is, or this wireless technology rather, that is a good fit for a use case, right? You're talking about how buildings are very complex and there's concrete, and you guys spent a lot of time sort of mapping Birmingham. So that pitch for us and our team is relatively straightforward. We can build out network coverage faster, and the cost of sending data is likely orders of magnitude cheaper than anything you're going to find for a competitive sort of network server solution. Now, you can go build your own LoRaWAN network infrastructure, right? You can run ChirpStack or something, and you can buy a bunch of gateways off the shelf, and you can customize what firmware they're running, and you can do that. And that could work for you. But if you're looking for a commercial grade sort of network solution that just works out of the box, when you're using Helium, the only fee associated with sending data is the idea of a data credit. And so for people who don't know, every time you send a packet, and I'm not sure how big your standard packet is, Austin, but every time you send a packet of 24 bytes, give or take, you're spending what's called one data credit. And that data credit is something that is sort of analogous to like cell phone minutes. For anybody who's old enough on this call to remember cell phone minutes, you'd go to the cell phone store, you'd swipe a credit card for 1,000 minutes, and you know exactly how many minutes you had for the cost. Data credits are exactly the same way. So in the case of something like Conserv, where one of your sensors might send data, I don't know, once a day, minute, hour? I mean, how often are you guys sending data?
We're every 10 minutes.
Every 10 minutes, right? So I happen to know off the top of my head that when you send a packet every 10 minutes from a sensor, that's going to cost you roughly 52 cents a year, right, on the Helium network when it comes to data credits.
And that's a cost that's fixed, which was important to us in time. Like that doesn't float, right? It's
right, exactly.
The mechanics of it that float, but the price stays the same.
Precisely. And because you guys are working with this patron model, I suspect your fee comes out of the tokens being produced by your hotspots anyways. So so anyways, to your original question, the pitch for us is if you are sold on LoRaWAN, we have the largest LoRaWAN network, the ability to build coverage faster, and the cost of data transfer is cheaper. And then, you mentioned things like buttoned up AWS integration, the TTM migration tools, all those things are being built to sort of add to the value proposition. Yeah, that's the short answer. Now, for people who haven't built on LoRaWAN, I had a conversation this morning with a Fortune 100 company that's doing a POC around a connected sort of consumer product. The pitch is the same things I just mentioned, but a little broader to incorporate how LoRaWAN is superior to things like Wi-Fi or cellular or Bluetooth or Zigbee when it comes to a solution that needs to take advantage of a network like that. So then you start talking about things like, these are things that you and Nathan probably sort of discussed when you were kicking around LoRaWAN, like, oh, we don't want to have to mess with the IT department. I don't want to have to send data over someone's network. Those are the sorts of things that you start to discuss in that sort of pitch. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And we haven't talked too much about that. I think some folks on the call may just have a good sense of this, but I think the public perception of it is completely upside down. So like, what do connected devices on the internet look like? Like, what's the makeup of that sort of set of things? And, I think in the popular mind, like, what's new, what's next? People talk about 5G, right? And it's like, there are going to be a couple billion people that have 5G enabled cellular devices, but in the next 5 to 10 years, there are going to be 300 billion, connected devices on the internet. Like, 99% of those aren't 5G. Like, what are they? It's, is there a car in this parking spot? Are the lights on? Is the door open? It's like sort of these sort of basic sort of synapses that are will be spread out over the world that are talking to a network. And that stuff is low power wide area network. And it's going to be such a huge part of that pie, but it's sort of not in the common, most people don't have a sense that this is even a thing. So
what's funny about 5G, whether or not you think it's real, which
separate podcast.
We don't just yet. But what has to happen is it has to be deployed actually more like a hotspot. Like it's less about towers and it's less about the best locations on top of Sutro Tower in San Francisco. It's more about, putting small cells
everywhere.
And so the Helium deployment model actually looks a lot better for something like 5G than it does for the typical telco model. That's a conversation for another time.
Well, I'll just say one thing about the network really quick too that we haven't touched on. You touched on it briefly in sort of your high-level Helium features, but if you are a museum and you have Wi-Fi working in your museum everywhere, great, you have coverage. You put a Wi-Fi sensor in there, and Wi-Fi is designed to stream Netflix. So that sensor, right, the battery lasts about 2 or 3 months.
Right.
And so even if you get Wi-Fi working great for you, right, it's not really a good solution. So we didn't say this specifically, but a LoRaWAN sensor running on Helium, even every 10 minutes, right, we get about 4 years. So
it's ridiculous. It's just
total
crazy.
game changer.
Yeah. And on the other side of that, as you said, you know, if Wi-Fi kills a sensor after 2 months, your whole value proposition disappears after probably just 1 or 2 sort of visits to a site. And you don't want your customers deploying or replacing batteries in a sensor. That just sounds like a disaster.
Yeah, again, it's not 1995. I think there we would have moved them up to like 1999, but it still feels, you know, it's not 2020.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so we got one question here from, let's see, Gabriel Rodriguez. What do you recommend to start with Helium with an Arduino or Raspberry Pi project? So I'll answer that in a second. Do you remember what you guys started with for prototyping? I mean, this was earlier days. Did you pull?
Nathan built a breadboard. That
Yeah.
was the first thing we did. We started really from scratch. I think we moved on from an Arduino there. We actually, I think in the early days, we basically did every configuration we could. We were running workshops at the time to help people, like, you know, DIY, build your own LoRaWAN stuff, because it helped us learn about it. Mm-hmm. So we ran into a little bit of everything early on. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, prototyping is well, we've got it down to a pretty good sort of science at this point. So to your question, Gabriel, so I'm going to drop a link here in the chat. This is just the developer documentation for how to get started with Arduino devices. So we've got, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different boards that support Arduino. We don't see, to be honest, too many people prototyping the end device with a Raspberry Pi. Recently, I talked to an elevator monitoring company that was using a Pi for prototyping. But you're going to be better starting off with a different sort of device, and I've listed all these in our documentation. And so that's where I would recommend that you start. We do tend to see lots of people using the Raspberry Pis to build gateways, which is, as I mentioned earlier, a big focus for our team now. So the Helium network has primarily been built with hotspots which are manufactured by Helium, and we're trying to actively sort of lean on the LoRaWAN ecosystem from the 5 or 6 sort of major gateway providers. And the hotspot itself is actually built on a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, and the models that are shipping very soon are built on a Pi 4. And we have all the documentation and firmware available to build your own version of a Helium hotspot based on a Pi. So yeah, we see more people building on Pis for the gateways, and the Arduino devices, you can go one of sort of 5 ways. The other thing that's worth mentioning is, if you're not already part of the Discord server, you should join this. And there's, like I said, thousands of people in there discussing everything from prototyping to gateways to when the ship from China is going to arrive, which has been a highly contested topic. The ship has arrived, by the way, and we're tracking it very closely. Cool. All right, so let's see. If there's anybody on this call, Austin, who's interested in sort of learning more about this, not Discord, sorry, Conserv, what's the best way to sort of get in touch with you? How should they engage?
You can throw that slide up really quick.
Okay.
I mean, just our contact information.
Yep, let's do that.
This is, you just go right to the source, right? So I put my email address on there, my phone number. We would love to talk with you directly. We'd love to share what we're doing. If you have any questions about Helium, right, what it's like to work with these guys, we'd love to talk about that. We've had a great experience. And we accidentally, this is part of our relationship with the Helium guys too, is we sort of accidentally became experts in LoRaWAN. Right? Like we didn't mean to, but it was really early and we had to figure it out. And so if you have questions about that too, whether it's high level questions or, you know, Nathan can answer really detailed questions about it. We just, have a lot of knowledge there. So I know everyone on this call lives in a city that has a great museum, and not just one, but many. And you know, if there's one of those places that you have a special affinity for, you know, just as a visitor, or you sit on the board, or you know someone who has a special love for that place, you know, we want to talk to them, right? Mm-hmm. Like you know, what's so beautiful about what we do is that it's not there's technology in it, but it really is sort of an emotional thing where these are things that we've decided collectively we care about, we want to take care of, and we get to step in and really be aligned with people's mission to do that. So if you or someone you know fits that description, like, we definitely want to talk to you. That's exciting for us.
Is there, you mentioned MoMA, which is obviously a massive sort of facility. Is there too small, right, of a place for you guys? Or is it, one room, something you care about a lot, we want to get in there with a sensor and start helping you monitor it?
There is nothing too small. I mean, we just say if there's a collection, there's a need for a good environment, there's a need for Conserv. And, we wanted to build something that would work for, a reasonably well-funded, really high-functioning institution, but was also accessible for a small historic property, right? Not just, accessible in terms of price, value, functionality. Our goal really is, just like Helium is trying to democratize this certain type of network, we really want to democratize these tools so that as many people have access to them as we can. It's going to be a little different, right, if we're managing, your, no disparagement against your shoe collection, but your fantastic shoe collection, right? We can help with that. But, that's not the core of our business model right now. That if there were too small, now some people's shoes collections are pretty large, but that might be too small.
Rick Ross has a remarkable shoe collection.
Hey, well, introduce us,
I'll see what I can do.
Okay.
All right, so I think we'll wrap it up. Is there anything else I can answer for you, Austin? Anything else on your mind about Helium?
Well, I would just, like to end on this note of, looking ahead for you guys. What are you really excited about? I know, you have a plan to grow, and, what does it look like to just grow like crazy and really end up in a place where you are just thrilled at the progress you guys have made in 12, 24 months, whatever that is?
Yeah, so, we have seen this explosive growth just since we first started shipping hotspots, which only was pretty much October of last year, right? So we've put out 5,000 of these hotspots, give or take. For us, we now are very, very focused on marrying the sort of incentivization models and the potential growth there with the sort of massive use cases that are going to take care of this network or use a network that we built. I mentioned before that we're going to almost double our coverage in like the next 6 weeks, which is just like a remarkable thing, right? How double your coverage in 6 weeks? Cool. We're going to do that. And the biggest thing for us, I think, is so again, we talk about things in terms of supply and demand, supply being the network coverage, demand being the devices that need it. The biggest thing for us, and the thing about which I'm most excited, is the integration of these third-party gateways into the ecosystem, right? So you guys mentioned that you use Tektellix. People on this call have probably used things from Multitech, from Curling, from Layered, from Browen, and Gemtech, which is part of Browen, or the other way around. That is going to lead to, or should lead to, explosive network growth, right? We basically go from requiring people to buy a new piece of hardware, whether they want to be a core part of the network or they have something to deploy in terms of a sensor, to basically saying, oh, okay, well, I've already got this infrastructure built on this model of gateway. We're talking to companies that have thousands of gateways from vendors like Tektellix, who are interested in using the Helium network and are just thinking about sort of converting all these things into sort of Helium compatible gateways. And so, that is where we plan to sort of just keep the gas on the fire and explode the network growth side. That is, that's very, very exciting. And so we're doing a lot of work to verify all these gateways, to document all these gateways. And then the biggest component of this is to make the economic model work when we're adding all these gateways such that they can become full HMT or blockchain miners, right? So right now you can take a Tektellix and turn it into essentially a Helium packet forwarder and put it on the network and things work. And we have lots of big POCs running on this. But soon, as soon as 4 to 8 weeks, we will be finalizing the ability to turn those into full blockchain participants where you're mining and providing coverage. And so I can see a future, quite frankly, for you guys, for example, where you get married up with patrons who aren't deploying hotspots, they're deploying Tektellix, right? Or Kona micros. On the enterprise side, we're seeing a lot of people come in and basically say, I want to use the Helium Network. I need to deploy Kona Micro 16 channels or Tectelic outdoor units. And, you know, we need these to be on the blockchain. And so the work that we're doing now is around something that we call Cloud Miner Pro, which is basically taking the mining component, which is the blockchain piece, and running it on the cloud. And so that's where we're focused intensely on that internally. And so if we can enable that to be very smooth, which we're on a path to, the network should grow just in like massive ways. So that's where our growth is going to come from. Sorry, Aaron Arthur is. Oh, sorry, someone asked me a question, and I will respond. Basically asking, how do you get involved in a certain part of the country? You can send me an email and I'll respond to you. But we'll take that offline. Okay, all right, so with that, I'll wrap it up. And I'll just say thank you to Austin. This has been great. This will be available probably next week via email. We'll send this out to everybody who registered. So it's Senseman@conserv.io. His number is there. Well, his number was on the slides, but 205-222-2847. I'm Mark@helium.com, and you can find the whole Helium team in our Discord server, which I put in the Slack, or the chat rather, for this webinar. So with that, I'll say goodbye. Any parting words you want to put out there, Austin?
No, thank you. You guys are providing a tremendous amount of value to people like us that are just, you know, we're trying to focus on customers and a particular solution they have, and to take this off of our plate so that we can really focus on the things that matter for our business. That was very powerful for us. So thank you all. Thanks. Yeah, we've enjoyed working with you, and we appreciate you pushing us on a lot of features and other pieces of the network. Hey, you asked, we're going to tell you. Good. All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon, and thanks everybody for joining. Have a great day. Thanks, Mark. See y'all.